Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Michael Williams with News Channel 5 political analyst Brian Crowley, a longtime veteran of the Palm Beach Post who covered statewide politics for many decades. Want to tee up what we're talking about. We welcome your comments as long as they're on point. We know there's a lot of passion on both sides of this issue. Election reform, an election reform bill that has now become law with Governor Ron DeSantis' signature. He made that at an airport hotel at PBIA this morning, not coincidentally. Just a stone's throw, relatively speaking, from Mar-a-Lago in the home of his political mentor, former President Donald Trump. Election reform has been controversial in Florida. Essentially, proponents said we need tighter security for elections. Voter ID requirements are going to be tightened up. Mail drop box security in locations will be tightened up. Absentee ballots, you'll have to apply every other year for one now. Proponents say this is good common sense efforts to move forward security. Opponents call it voter suppression. Want to hear your view. Interestingly, this morning, for an event of this magnitude, the governor stiff-armed all Florida news reporters, save the Bureau of Fox News, where he, as some critics noted, basically gift-wrapped a thank you, and Fox News live coverage of this did not let any reporters in other than Fox, no questions taken. And when he came out, he had this briefly to say when we asked, why were we not allowed in to talk about this issue?
Governor, national TV wasn't secret.
Why is this? Tell us. Couldn't get inside.
You heard the governor say it was on national TV. It wasn't secret. He did not answer why he did not take questions, both that would have allowed him to expand on the positives as he sees them, or the criticisms as his critics see them about election reform. Be that as it may, Brian, for our audience, tee up what has, first of all, mechanically, what is election reform doing? And then your reaction to both this morning and the signing and the broader implications, pro and con. And of course, that depends on the side of the aisle you're on as you see people, relatively small but enthusiastic crowd that greeted the governor briefly outside the hotel this morning. First, what's election reform do?
Well, election reform makes it tougher for mail-in votes, makes it tougher to use drop boxes for dropping off ballots. That you can have fewer of them, that they must have an elections official standing over them. You can't give food or water to anybody waiting in line, especially if it's long lines. The voter ID requirements. Some of the things that they want to do you could argue are reasonable, but a lot of it, frankly, is just silly stuff that's coming from a governor who less than 6 months ago was applauding Florida's November election as having one of the best, safest, most accurate elections in the nation, something that could be duplicated by other states. So,
Brian, hold your thought. I want to put two comments up because they really kind of delineate the passions on this issue. Scott Sutton, our producer, Brian, Sharon Miller, and then Roscoe Bell. Sharon Miller says, no, the Democrats have to cheat to win. And that's from Sharon Miller. And then Roscoe Bell says Republicans should just move to Russia. That, in some ways, there's Sharon Miller's comment, said Democrats have to cheat to win. And then Roscoe Bell, right below that comment, said Republicans should just move to Russia. Or he says if you can't win fairly, Republicans have to cheat. So you see the passion on all sides of these issues. I just wanted to frame that. We'll take the comments down for a moment. Your take, you certainly better than anybody know the passions around this new election law.
Sure.
Again, mechanically, does it make it tougher to vote?
It will make it tougher to vote, especially for people who are older. And let me address the cheat to win thing for a moment. In Florida, this is a law that only applies to Florida in what the governor himself would describe as a near perfect election in November. Republicans have controlled the state since 1998. They've won every governor's race since 1998. They have both seats in the U.S. Senate. They have overwhelming majorities in the state legislature. They control 2 of the 3 seats in the state cabinet. What are you fixing? The Republicans have done great for over 20 years in Florida. So if there are problems in other states need to deal with those, of course. But there is no problem in Florida, in DeSantis' own words. So there was nothing really to fix. This was a political stunt.
Darren Young says, you've brought this up. Darren Young says, perhaps we can pop that comment up. How is my mom going to vote by mail? You have concerns about older voters. Many have said it'll be voter suppression. particularly hitting minority communities. I asked Senator Bobby Powell, African-American state senator from Palm Beach County. He said, yes, that was a worry, but he said, listen, this is going to impact voters of all backgrounds, all political affiliations. You have that concern too. I don't know if we can put up that comment that I brought up from the woman said, how's my mom going to be able to vote? But Brian, your take on that?
Well, my mother just turned 90. Your father just turned 90. It's not easy for people who are 90 years old to go through the process that's being acted to vote. And sometimes they need help. And this has made it more difficult for people to quote unquote harvest ballots, which is to pick up other people's ballots and deliver them for them. There are great restrictions on that now. Over 20% of Florida residents are 65 and older. So, a lot of this impact's not going to, hurt younger voters. It's going to hurt the folks who are 65 and older. And again, in November, Ron DeSantis proclaimed that the Florida election system was near perfect. So it begs the question, what are we fixing?
Republicans, as you pointed out, for those of you just joining us, were in the vanguard, pushed hard, very hard, for mail-in voting for years. In fact, when he was president, President Trump took advantage of that, obviously couldn't be here at all times. He took advantage of mail-in voting. It was Republicans behind mail-in voting. But again, Gail Harrell, and you'll hear all this for our audience. You'll be hearing this at 5 and 6 o'clock on our television broadcast. You'll be hearing from supporters and you'll be hearing from opponents of this new election law. It's getting a lot of political coverage, both locally, statewide, and nationally today. Proponents say, listen, what's wrong with tightening up election security, even if it's around the margins? And what's wrong with making sure that we are doing everything possible? Answer to those supporters who rightly say, well, if we're doing more to tweak it, let's not make it static. Let's make it even better. And when you hear that from state senators and others, fair critique, it would seem. Brian, what do you say to that?
Well, it's absolutely true that we should make sure that our elections are as secure as possible and also as easy as reasonable for Floridians to go vote. This is a state that had a history of problems. The 2000 election, the notorious 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore, which lasted for almost 2 months of recounting and lawsuits and a great deal of controversy. Wound up because there were problems with ballots, including in Palm Beach County. Over the years, those things got fixed. The question isn't, in my mind, what's most secure for Florida voters. To me, what was the governor fixing? He said the November election was perfect, and I'm going to keep reminding him of that. He said the election was near perfect. So what was he fixing? This wasn't fixing anything. This was politics.
Katie Slane, and we'll get to the stiff arm for media, although I'm sure that will engender a lot of comments here. It was a Fox News exclusive for the #1 viewer of Fox at Mar-a-Lago, President or former President Donald Trump. Katie Slane, let's put the comment up. Katie says it's safe and now it's better, which many proponents argue it will be. Critics say it won't. I don't understand your continuous bashing of this governor. You people continually show who owns you. It's not becoming. You'll vote the same way by mail. I get my ballot sent to me, Katie says, and I mail it back. Geez, by the way, I'm over 65. And no, I did not vote for DeSantis, but I will next time, thanks to you guys. Not sure what all you guys she's referring to, but I suspect it's in general the media, except although Fox News was there to carry this exclusively, I might add. But to Katie's point, your response, Brian.
Well, let me first note that Fox News said just a little while ago that they did not know that this was exclusive. They did not know that Ron DeSantis was going to turn this into a bill signing. They thought that they had invited him to be a guest on Fox and Friends for a normal interview. So they are proclaiming some surprise with how the governor turned this into a political event.
I talked to a political operative, a Republican, who also said, I too was surprised that not all media was allowed in to ask questions. He's an elected official, and questions, both those that would allow him to illuminate his point of view and those that would make him defend his point of view, were not allowed to be asked. That's nothing but a factual statement about the press's role to ask questions, allow him to illuminate and to defend what he did. Brian?
Well, let me take it one step further. It wasn't just the media that, for the most part, was locked out of this. There were no Florida reporters allowed to be in to witness and ask the governor questions about something that is having a fundamental impact on Florida voters. But it was turned into a local activist political party event. There were no Democrats in the room. There were no ordinary citizens in the room. These were people who were in the room, who were political activists, who were there to support Ron DeSantis. And that too said all you needed to know about this event. He's the governor of Florida. He's not the chairman of the Republican Party. He's the governor of Florida. He's there to represent all 21 million of our citizens. He's there to represent the 15 million registered voters, of which only a third are Republicans. So, the other 2/3 of the voters have a right to know what their governor is doing and be represented in the room. And the governor decided to make this a partisan political event. That's on him. It's not on the media. He's the one who decided that.
Brian, already we're hearing about lawsuits. Some have already been filed. Bobby Powell said, listen, last year, more Democrats voted by mail than Republicans. And he said, tongue in cheek, he said, and that became, quote, problematic in Powell's opinion that Republicans didn't like it and said, wait a minute, your take.
Well, let me be fair to the governor on this extent. This is what we do: is we sue each other in this country now. Everything is a political fight.
Yeah.
I think if the governor had vowed that he was going to personally distribute ballots to all 15 million voters in America and in Florida, somebody would have sued him anyway. So that's the nature of the politics we're in. Both sides are guilty of sometimes going to extremes. But I expect the governor of Florida to be a politician, but I also expect him to be governor first. And there was no need to turn this thing into a political event. If you're genuinely trying to improve the election for every voter, and if that's not your cause and you want this to be a political event, then that's what it is. It's a political stunt.
Darren Young said, Scott Sutton, my great producer, Scott, Darren Young, he's about top of the page, said we need it easier. We need it easier for both sides to vote in all cities and counties for all races and background. That's the tough dynamic of trying to make sure that happens. Patrick Franklin, you'll hear from him, Urban League of Palm Beach County, saying, I'm concerned that it will be tougher for voters in many minority communities. Bobby Powell, African-American state senator, said it's going to be tougher in general for all Floridians, including Republicans, to vote. You heard Katie, her comment, very pointed and thoughtful, said, listen, I'm over 65, I'm voting, get off his back. We're going to have to see how this really plays out. And in fairness, I've heard this criticism in other states that a lot of people are saying the sky's falling when they haven't really read all the details of the law. And you say sometimes these laws have unintended consequences. They may spur voter registration. They may do a lot of things. Your thoughts about all that?
Well, one of the things that I would like to have seen the governor do is, he could have called this an interim step, and then he perhaps would have said, maybe we should explore other ways of voting. Frankly, I would like to see us go to online voting. Look at all the things we do online. Whether you're ordering on Amazon or doing business with your bank, you do it in what we hope are very, very secure ways. You give them your credit card information, your bank account information, a lot of other personal information. We ought to be able to come up with a system that is secure, that allows online voting. And I think we would see dramatic changes in the percentage of people who vote in elections if we made it easier to vote online. And I would have been impressed had the governor said, I'm going to form a commission of independents who are going to look at the future of voting and see if there are ways that we can change it to be more electronic, to do online voting. And maybe they ultimately would have decided that that wasn't a safe thing to do. But, this that he did today, and that with the backing of the Florida legislature, which passed this legislation that he signed on a party vote, this was a political stunt, and he reinforced the idea that it was a political stunt the way he handled the bill signing today. In all the governors that I've covered, I've never seen anybody pull this kind of stunt.
You call it a stunt.
It is a stunt. I mean, I have covered Republican and Democratic governors in the state who had hugely different opinions on things, and when they were governor and they had something that affected nearly every citizen of the state, they didn't go keep the media out. I've never seen a governor so afraid of answering questions from the press as this governor. And this isn't just he's reluctant to give out public records. He keeps his travels secret till the last minute. We've never had a governor, Republican or Democrat, who has acted like this.
Carrie Crean Williams, excuse me, Carrie, if I'm mispronouncing that name, but says about halfway down the page, Scott, if you can pop it up, the news is making this a, quote, political event. Speak to that critique, Brian.
No, the news didn't make this a political event. He's the one that decided to go on Fox News. Had he wanted to go on Fox and CNN and MSNBC and a whole, left to right to center, and just turn this into a non-political event, he couldn't. He went into a small room, into the Hilton in West Palm Beach, and invited only Republicans into the room to watch him sign this thing. And even Fox News didn't know he was going to turn it into a bill signing. So yeah, he brought props with him. This was entirely a political event. And I would add that I've already received a series of emails from the various groups that support Ron DeSantis, and in theory, Ron DeSantis himself, saying what a wonderful thing they did. And I'm sure before the day is over, I'll get some emails suggesting I should send them some money.
We have two comments. One from, again, Darren Young saying Donald Trump lost over 30 times. We also have a comment, Scott, if you can help me call this one up, because it speaks to something Bobby Powell argued about. It's from Maureen McKnight Winans. And she says Donald Trump's not going to commit to running in 2024 because he has not conceded the 2020 election, and he never will. If the result of the 2020 election isn't overturned, we've lost our republic. We'll keep that comment up there. That's Maureen's very passionate view, and thank you for all of you weighing in. To Maureen's point, and the counter to that is Bobby Powell, obviously not responding to your comment, Maureen, but he argued that this election law, in essence, was a perpetuation in some respects all over the country, because this is happening with tightening voting laws, of perpetuating, quote, the big lie. Those who might disagree with Ms. Winans would argue that the election's over. Somebody else said he lost 30 times, referencing all the court cases. But when people feel as passionately, as many do, about the outcome of the 2020 election, aren't these election laws and the debate we're hearing from our viewers really just a replay of this? And how do we come out of the spin cycle, Brian?
I don't know how we come out of the cycle. The people who said that the election was fair and that the ballots were fair were largely Republicans. They were Republican leaders.
Attorney General.
We use George as an example, the Republican governor, the Republican Secretary of State, the Republican election officials. There were Republican judges, many of whom were Trump appointees who found no problems. There was no finding in any state by any election officials, any judge, any investigator of any kind of fraud that would overturn the election. But President Trump, former president, people may forget that in the 2016 election, when he thought he might lose, he early on started calling that election rigged, and that the election was going to be stolen. And lo and behold, he won. So suddenly it was a fair election. I don't think the republic is in great danger. We're moving along. The states are doing their thing. Washington's doing its thing, as it has for over 200 years, and we'll get through this.
Bonnie Hartman-Koos, in response to Maureen's statement, said at the bottom of the page, Scott, Trump lost, Biden won. Reiterating your point. Brian, you often point out something, though. The bottom line is Republicans have been elected by Floridians. Given that choice, they have thorough control of the state legislature and the governor's mansion for a generation plus now. And so you often comment about this with me. The bottom line is Republicans are in control. Republicans felt, however much people may argue, disagree with it, that this is what they wanted and felt was needed. And Republican voters, as is their right, have outvoted Democrats election after election to put Republicans in control of both branches of the Florida legislature and the governor's mansion. And it's within the Republicans' right to do the will or the bidding of voters as they and their constituents see fit. So at the end of the day, they would argue, what are we arguing about? We voted for them. This is what we want. This is what we have. And if you don't like it, go vote for Democrats.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And you're right. I say that all the time. Ron DeSantis won. An overwhelming majority of the legislature was put there by the voters, and they decided to do this election reform, as they call it, and they've done it, and they're in the power to do it, and that's fine. And my problem with what happened today wasn't the legislation that passed as such. It was the fact that the governor, rather than having a normal bill signing, decided to turn it into a political event, decided to turn it into a stunt, decided to ignore questions from the media or from opponents. If you're going to be governor, be governor. If you want to be chairman of the Republican Party, resign as governor and be chairman of the Republican Party. But there are times when you just have to be governor. And if you're going to do something that affects all 15 million voters in Florida, then act like a governor and sign the bill in a proper way and answer questions from the media and others, and then move on. I mean, this is what the voters wanted when they elected these folks. This is what you've got. This is their right to do it, and move on from there. But the way he handled it today was poorly done.
Brian, one last question, and we'll try and work in a few more comments. We also have brewing in the Democratic-led House the voter reform that would, critics argue, Republican critics, would federalize the voting process. So we're a long way from over about the fights about election reform, both at the state level and conversely, the arguments by Republicans that the Democrats at the federal level are trying to federalize too much of our election laws, something that's always been left to states to have their own specific rules and regulations. The Donnybrook has just begun. A lot of storm clouds on the horizon on this one, no matter which side of the aisle you're on.
Well, I think in fairness to the governor and the Republican leadership in Florida, the folks in Washington, the Democrats in Washington, are looking at things that they see in other states like Georgia, which they consider more egregious in how heavy-handed they are in changing how folks can vote and how ballots are counted. These changes, by comparison, are relatively mild, I think some would argue. So I think what we're seeing in Washington from the Democrats is looking harder at other states, and of course they're going to lump Florida into it. But I think overall they have greater concerns about what's going on in some of the other states than they do in Florida.
Brian, I think we'll leave it there. We appreciate all of you weighing in with your comments. We will have coverage from both sides of the issue. We had state senators. Republican Gail Harrell was at the signing today. We'll be hearing from other Republicans as well in our on-air coverage now at 4 o'clock, also at 5 and 6 o'clock as well. We'll continue to follow this story. We know that the comments, as we see here, Brian, are passionate on all sides of the issues. We always welcome them, as always, and they, for the most part, are respectful of the other side. People have passionate views. The debate is not going to end today, and we appreciate each and every one of you weighing in with your passionate thoughts on this topic. Brian, most of all, thanks for trying to bring some sense of perspective to this, and Brian will be my guest, as always, as part of our roundtable and To the Point this Sunday. Brian, appreciate you being with us.
Glad to do it.
Thank you most of all to you at home, and have a great evening.